Today's mindful moment. Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to rethink how we see religion? We're diving into Karen Armstrong's The Case for God today.
Always exciting to explore these big questions.
So the big idea is that pre-modern folks, they didn't see religion as like a list of things you gotta believe.
Yeah, more like something you did, a way of life almost.
Okay, now break that down for me. What's that mean?
Well, Armstrong talks about mythos, but not like fake news, more like a guide for action, like those hero stories we all know.
Right. So it's not about did this exact hero exist? It's using that story to, I don't know, become a better you.
You got it. Imagine a recipe, right? Reading it's one thing, but the real knowing comes from baking that cake.
So ritual was like the baking part for these cultures.
Exactly. They weren't just showing their beliefs in the ritual created the ideas. Wild, right?
Whoa, that is mind-blowing. You're saying action came before belief in a way.
Think about those cave paintings, paleolithic era. Not just pretty pictures. We know they did rituals there. Some even dressed as animals.
Trying to connect to like a deeper part of existence, right?
Yeah. And Armstrong mentions this cave. Draw first. You got to crawl through this crazy tight tunnel to get to the main room.
Oh, I've seen pictures. It's claustrophobic.
Then, boom, you're hit with these incredible engravings.
The whole journey, that's part of the experience.
It makes it clear, for them, the doing was the understanding. No separation.
So how'd they get from these rituals to like the idea of a higher power? Was it idol worship?
Not really. They felt this being, a life force running through everything, but then certain things became like symbols of that power.
So a rock could represent stability, but they weren't bowing down to that specific rock.
You got it. It's about what the rock stands for, what it points to, and different cultures had different ways of picturing this being.
Give us some examples. How'd they wrap their heads around this, well, being?
Okay, so in the Upanishads, there's Brahman. It's this total energy that holds the universe together, but it's beyond personality. You don't pray to it.
Not like asking for good luck on a test then.
Nope. Then you got Aurum from Mesopotamia. That's pure radiant power, bigger than any single god.
More like a universal force, I see.
Yeah. And in the ancient Middle East, there's Elu, kind of like our word holy, but it's less about being good, more like raw, luminous power.
It's fascinating how different folks grappled with this being idea. It makes you rethink what religion even is, right?
Totally. And speaking of challenging assumptions, Armstrong talks about these high gods, the creator types. They kind of faded in importance over time.
Why'd that happen? You'd think the creator god would be the most important.
They became too abstract, too distant, hard to connect with personally. What's really interesting is kenosis pops up in lots of traditions.
Kenosis? What's that about?
Means emptying, letting go of ego, that me stuff, to actually experience the divine.
Sounds kind of tough in our selfie-obsessed world, haha.
You said it. You see this in Buddhism, the idea of anatta, no self, that our individual identity is an illusion.
And even in Confucianism, no specific god there, but tons of emphasis on compassion, putting others first, right?
Yeah, echoes that same idea of getting past yourself to reach something bigger.
Wow, so from ancient mystics to Eastern philosophy, that selfless theme pops up.
It really does. It shows how deep this human need is. This yearning for connection to something beyond us, it's woven into our history everywhere.
Speaking of history, let's look at some Bible stories Armstrong brings up. She says the Garden of Eden, it's not meant to be literal, more like a myth about being human.
Right. It's exploring why we suffer, why we feel separate from the divine, not about a historical picnic gone wrong, haha.
More like a psych deep dive then. And then there's the Song of the Sea, same imagery used by different authors with different points to make.
Shows how fluid these stories were, always open to new interpretations. But that fluidity gets tricky with the Deuteronomists, the folks who shaped the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible.
Tricky how?
Well, they brought in this idea that violence could be, like, okayed by religion, a pretty dark turn.
Yikes. Using God to justify hurting others. That's a scary thought.
It shows how even scriptures can be twisted, used for bad ends.
But luckily, other writers push back against that.
Absolutely. Second Isaiah, for example, he's the one who really nails down monotheism, one God only. But even his vision had some, well, baggage.
And baggage? What do you mean?
It was still tied to wiping out enemies, that whole my God's stronger than yours thing.
So even with one God, that temptation to use violence was still there.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even good ideas can get messed up. But then you have stories like The suffering servant.
Who's that?
This figure who represents peaceful resistance, finding redemption through suffering, a powerful counter to that violence idea.
So even within the Bible, you got these different voices, different ways to live in the world.
Exactly. That's what makes studying these origins so fascinating.
It's not the simple black and white picture some folks imagine, that's for sure.
And that's why we got to keep digging.
This is a good spot to take a break. Next time, we'll move from these ancient traditions to the world of Greek thought, see how they tackled these big questions. Stay tuned.
Back again. We went from ancient rituals to, now, the Greeks, and they're all about logic and reason.
Big shift, huh? So these guys, like the Milesian philosophers, they were more focused on what? The physical world? Stuff you can see and poke.
Exactly. Observing, thinking it through, that's their jam.
So did they just ditch the whole divine thing altogether then?
Not so fast. Think about Pythagoras, famous for his math, right? But for him, finding those mathematical patterns, that was like glimpsing the divine order of the universe.
Whoa, math is a spiritual experience. That's kind of cool.
It is. But even with all this logos, this Greek love of logic, the craving for a direct experience of the divine, that's still there. You got the mystery religions popping up.
Like those Eleusinian mysteries, right?
Yeah.
Super secretive rituals and stuff.
Yep. They're still after that sense of the sacred, even in this age of reason. Seems we humans can't shake that need to connect to something bigger, no matter how much we think.
Makes you wonder if it's just built into us, huh? What about the big-name philosophers, though? How did those guys fit into all this?
Well, take Socrates, the OG philosopher. He's all about that questioning life, seeking wisdom, right up to his death. Real commitment to virtue, kind of inspiring.
It's like philosophy isn't just ideas in your head, it's how you live. Okay, what about Plato? He's kind of a big deal, right?
He is. He's got this idea of the demiurge. Not a creator god exactly, more like a force that shapes the world from, like, pre-existing stuff.
Interesting. So not creating from nothing, more like sculpting what's already there.
Yeah. And Plato believed that human intelligence, that's a spark of the divine, immortal too. We've got a piece of that higher realm within us.
So a part of God is in us rather than God making us from scratch. That flips the script. What about Aristotle, though? Where does he stand on all this?
Aristotle thought deep thinking, whether it's philosophy or science, that was connecting with the divine, tapping into God's hidden life.
So reason and spirituality, not enemies after all. More like two sides of the same coin.
You could say that. It shows how humans have tried to figure out the universe and our place in it in so many different ways. And it wasn't just the Greeks doing the thinking. Jewish folks were mixing these ideas up too, especially that concept of wisdom as a bridge between us and the divine.
Like a cultural exchange program, ancient style. It's cool how these ideas bounce around, everyone learning from each other.
It shows how connected our intellectual history really is, and that mixing of ideas, it gets even more intense as we move into Christianity developing.
Ooh, okay, I'm ready for that. What happens next?
A huge turning point is when the Second Temple in Jerusalem gets destroyed. This was a massive blow to both Jewish and Christian communities.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been devastating, losing such an important place. How'd they cope?
For the Jews, you see the Pharisees stepping up. They help shift the focus from the temple to the Torah, those sacred scriptures.
So the written word becomes the central thing for Jewish identity.
Exactly. Early Christians, they were all about prepping for the coming kingdom of God. They kept a lot of Jewish practices, but saw Jesus as the Messiah, the key to God's plan.
And this is where Christianity starts to become its own thing.
It is, and as it develops, you see a shift in what belief even means.
Wait, what? How can belief change?
Well, today, we think of believing as, like, agreeing with certain ideas. Back then, it was closer to loyalty, trust, putting your life on the line for something.
More about actions than just thoughts in your head.
Big difference. You see it in how early Christians used midrash, this way of interpreting Jewish scriptures. They weren't just passively accepting, they were wrestling with the text, finding new meanings in light of Jesus.
So a more dynamic, living relationship with Scripture.
Absolutely. And another big development is the idea of Jesus as the Son of God, but even that had different interpretations early on.
So debates about Jesus' divinity, that's been going on from the very beginning. Interesting. Any other big ideas brewing during this time?
Oh yeah, a game changer was creation ex nihilo, the idea that God made the universe from nothing.
Now that's a heavy concept. What does that imply?
Well, it paints God as even more transcendent, not so hands-on with the universe anymore. Huge implications for how people saw God's role.
One idea, and bam, the whole picture of God changes. What about the Trinity? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that one always trips me up.
It's meant to. The Trinity is not a simple equation. It's saying, hey, stop trying to box God in with logic, embrace the mystery.
Admitting our brains can't fully grasp the divine.
You got it. Augustine, for example, he saw the Trinity as a reflection of our own minds, saying introspection, meditation, that's how you get closer to it.
Looking inward to understand the outward, that's deep. Any other ways people tried to approach God during this time?
You also have folks like Denis the Areopagite. He's all about the apophatic way. Focus on what God is not instead of trying to define what God is.
So, like, describing God by saying what God isn't sounds kind of backwards.
It is. But it's another way to acknowledge we can't pin God down with our words. Then there's Anselm of Canterbury, faith-seeking understanding, his famous line. But for him, faith wasn't blind, it was action-based, then you can understand.
Gotcha. Got to walk the walk before you can talk the talk.
Right. And now, as we head into the modern world, science comes along and really shakes things up.
Ooh, yeah, that's got to cause some friction. This seems like a good spot to pause before we dive into that era. Join us next time as we explore how science and religion have tangled, and sometimes tangoed, over the centuries.
We're back! From ancient beliefs to Greek thinkers, now we're hitting the modern world, where science really starts making waves.
Yeah, I got to imagine some fireworks when science starts poking at those old religious ideas.
Yeah.
Did people just ditch faith when the labs started proving things?
It wasn't that simple. Lots of early scientists, they were super religious too. Like Johannes Kepler, devout Christian, he saw his astronomy work as uncovering God's design in the universe.
So for him, stargazing was like a form of worship.
Pretty much. But of course, there were clashes too. The Catholic Church, they weren't too keen on some ideas like Galileo and that whole Earth go around the sun thing.
That's when the science versus religion story really starts getting cold.
And guys like René Descartes, they added fuel to that fire. He was all about finding certainty, and his view of the universe was very mechanical, which made God seem more distant, less involved in the day-to-day.
Like God wound up the universe clock and then stepped back, huh?
Kind of like that. Then comes Isaac Newton, gravity and all that, which really reinforces this idea of a universe running on set laws.
But even with all this science going on, people still wanted that personal connection to the divine, right? You can't just logic your way to feeling awe, I guess.
Totally. You've still got folks like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, big on compassion and kenosis, that emptying of the self we talked about, seeing that as the path to truly knowing God.
So mysticism sticks around, even while our view of the cosmos gets all sciencey. What about atheism, though? Was that just science winning the argument?
The Enlightenment definitely saw more atheism. Thinkers like Jean Meslier, they straight up challenged religion. But it wasn't just science. Lots of social and philosophical stuff was bubbling up too.
So it's complicated, like most things in history, right? What about the 1800s and 1900s? How'd things evolve then?
Things get even wilder. You've got evangelicalism on the rise, partly a reaction to deism, that distant clockmaker God. They wanted that personal Jesus, a more emotional faith.
Back to that heart-centered religion, huh?
Yeah, but at the same time, you got guys like Ludwig Feuerbach saying God is just us, projected outwards, our best selves blown up huge.
And Marx calling religion the opiate of the masses, used to control folks.
Right. Lots of criticism of traditional religion going on. Then, of course, boom, Darwin drops the evolution bomb.
That must really shaken things up, challenging the whole creation story, our place in the world, all of it.
It did. Life evolving naturally, not through some divine poof that further widened the gap between science and theology. You get scientific atheism gaining steam, guys like Robert Ingersoll and John William Draper. They're saying science and religion are at war.
And then there's Freud, with his whole religion as wish fulfillment thing stemming from childhood needs. Seems like those centuries were all about questioning, figuring out if the old beliefs still held up. So where do we go from there? How does religion even respond to all this?
Well, by the late 20th century, postmodernism comes along. This is all about rejecting those big, overarching stories, no absolute truth anymore, whether it's from religion or science.
So more skepticism, more it depends kind of thinking.
Exactly. And this leads to postmodern theology. Guys like Mark C. Taylor, they're trying to find new ways to talk about God in a world where those old certainties are gone.
Not ditching religion, but finding what still works, what still speaks to people.
That's it. It's an ongoing conversation, and there's no easy answer.
What a journey we've been on. Ancient rituals, philosophy, scientific revolutions, all trying to get at this idea of the divine. What sticks out to you most from all this?
It's the human need to connect with something bigger. It just keeps popping up, whether you call it God, the sacred, or whatever. It drives our art, our ideas, our whole understanding of existence. We've always got to reach for something beyond ourselves.
I think I was most surprised by how much pre-modern religion was about doing, not just believing, not signing off on a creed, but actively participating in rituals that connected you to something else.
And that whole self-transcendence thing keeps coming up too, whether through kenosis, compassion, or just ditching the ego. You got to get past yourself to truly connect with something bigger.
Makes you wonder, in our world that's so me-focused,
hmm
is there a way back to that? Can we find that connection again?
Maybe it's rediscovering ritual, even in non-religious ways. Or maybe it's cultivating that sense of awe, looking at the universe and feeling small, but in a good way. Or maybe it's simply being kind, realizing we're all connected, part of this bigger thing.
That's a great thought to end on. We might not have all the answers, but the search itself, that's what keeps us going, keeps us growing.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This deep dive has really given us a lot to think about. Thanks for being our guide.
Thanks for joining us on Mindful Moments. Remember to read, subscribe, share, and purchase.